Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving. And sometimes pretty fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here's he is.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift, everyone. We've got a great episode. I am so excited to have my guest and longtime friend, Dr. Glenn Jaffe, on. As I've mentioned in a previous episode, and even a couple of years ago, I did an episode dedicated to what it's like to really live with an electric vehicle. We've heard all the hype. Everybody's been super excited. And at the time I did that podcast, it was a little more theoretical. Now EVs have been around a while and more people have been living with them. So we have some more empirical data. So I'm excited to actually hear from someone who lived with an electric vehicle for a time. Now, you guys probably heard about what happened in Chicago during the winter when it got cold and all the Teslas were dead. Nothing would charge. The recharging stations were trickling out the electrons at the rate of molasses. And people started to realize, okay, electric vehicles don't always work the way we want them to. But my guest today lives down here in the South, in the Charlotte, North Carolina area with me. But he's originally from New Jersey and the Midwest, so he is no stranger to cold weather. But like a lot of us, he got smart and moved south. Glenn has been a chiropractor since, what is it, Glenn, 2003?
That's correct.
And you started your own practice, Jaffe Chiropractic, in 2006 here in Charlotte.
Yeah, we're about to enter year 19. I can't believe it.
I know, isn't it amazing? All we're really doing is admitting how old we are, but it's wonderful that your business has been so successful and you've helped so many people with your chiropractic. But what I want to talk today about is you living with an electric vehicle. So tell me why you decided in the first place to go all electric.
Well, I think this may come to a shock to some people listening to this, but the fact that I got an electric vehicle was not the primary reason I got an electric vehicle.
Interesting.
So I don't know, we haven't mentioned said vehicle's name yet, so I don't know if we want to let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah,
here.
Go ahead if that's why you chose it.
So absolutely. So a couple of years ago, I guess almost 3 years ago now, my brother introduced me to a car company named Rivian, totally brand new from the ground up. Started by a very, very analytical, intelligent, engineered kind of thinker. And so he looked at the landscape of what he wanted to do and build a car, and he wanted to do it differently from the ground up. And he wanted to do it on an electric platform. So I started investigating this company and reading about kind of the DNA that they were coming from. And I really was intrigued by the fact that this company was kind of not influenced so much by traditional American automakers per se. There wasn't a lot of Detroit DNA, if you will, coming through the vehicle, back to Henry Ford, if you will. But, so for the longest time, I hadn't had an American car. My first two cars when I was in high school were American cars, but ever since then I had either a Nissan or a Toyota or a Lexus. And so I kind of stayed away from American cars because of the quality or the assumed quality that I felt was in them. And so the more I paid attention to this car company and the more that they put out there, and I kind of was drawn to the build, the styling, the idea of having an electric SUV, which nobody really in the United States had kind of mastered, if you will.
Right. Yeah. The Tesla Model X didn't really count.
No. It's still a car.
Still doesn't
right.
count.
And yeah. So the R1S and the R1T were the ones that they had released, and seeing the mock-ups and everything, I was really intrigued, and had, room for 7 people, three rows if you wanted, the R1S. And obviously the fascination of having the uniqueness of an electric SUV was really kind of neat. So the fact that it was electric, yeah, maybe it added to it a little bit, but I just was enamored of the styling and the kind of the thought and the big picture with Rivian.
And it is an absolutely gorgeous vehicle. And it was one of the largest SUVs that's available in electric. So I know you have a family, so being able to cram kids and all their stuff in it is always a priority.
Yeah, and you go from little kids and strollers and car seats, and mine are teenagers now, and so it's softball bags, school bags, lunch bags, camp chairs to sit at athletic events, and when you go on a road trip, I've got two girls, so there's a lot of luggage that we
Yes, we do tend to pack a little bit excessively. I will admit to doing that. Well, given how different Rivian is, did you, even though you did all of that research, which I commend you for doing, did you still have any reservations about going with a brand new, very different company that did not have a track record? Did you worry about what the reliability would be and the support for it?
I did, but I was surprised at how less of an issue I felt that was going into it. I felt confident. I think I have to give Rivian some credit here. I think they did a really nice job of allaying those kinds of concerns leading up to the rollout of the vehicles. There was a lot of delay from the date of when they were supposed to be released until they actually got out there. And
Not entirely their fault. We had this little thing called a pandemic.
Yeah, those stupid computer chips,
Yep.
Among other things. But I think that helped them with their quality, and they made sure. Now, of course, everybody's going to complain about something, and it's not that they didn't have any issues, but I felt pretty confident. Just some of the initial reviews and people that got their hands on them at first. Just the build, they kept going back to how well built they were and how Rivian didn't seem to cut corners with things and didn't get cheap with things. And I think they learned a lot of what they saw Tesla do the first couple generations, where it was either to speed up production or to keep costs down. But there was a lot of corner cutting, I think, in the early Teslas. And
Still
I
is.
didn't feel that. Yeah, I didn't feel that in Rivian. If anything, you probably can appreciate this, Leanne, I think the Rivian was over-engineered.
Well, I drive German cars, so over-engineering is just a way of life for us. So,
Yeah.
What was the experience like actually buying it? Because Rivian has a direct-to-consumer model, which is similar to Tesla. I think they do it a lot better, but they don't have dealerships all over the country. In fact, they just have a handful of what they call spaces, because, that just sounds so much, more classy and very non-dealership like for their brand. So, but they only have a handful of these spaces all over the country. There's one in Southern California, there's one in Texas, there's two in New York, there's one in Atlanta. So what was the process and the experience like from the time you ordered one to how you actually took delivery of it?
Well, it was interesting because I bought it almost sight unseen, if you will. And I never test drove one until my brother got his. And so, I got that far in the process. He got his about 6 months before mine was delivered. So I never went to the space to see it in person. I never got to sit in it until I got to sit in his. And so it was a really kind of an interesting perspective because you didn't really see a lot of them on the road. So I didn't really get a visual to compare it to. So a lot of it was what I saw on social media and in emails and different articles and different pictures that got shared. So there was a lot of trust, I guess, built into this process.
Quite the leap of faith.
It was, and again, I'll give them credit. Their process, I think, allowed that trust to be built because they had no reputation, and so I think they did a pretty commendable job of founding a good base underneath of that to get the people comfortable enough to spend the amount of money that the R1S or the R1T originally cost to get it without really, getting in and checking it out.
That makes sense. So how did you take delivery of it? Did you have to go to Atlanta to get it, or did it show up on your doorstep?
So they gave me the option. I could go down to Atlanta and get it, which is an over 4-hour drive from here, and then drive it home. Or for not small, but not a large amount of money, they would deliver it to my house. So I chose that option because I just didn't want to spend an entire day going down and back to Atlanta. I traded in my old vehicle, and Rivian made it very easy to trade the vehicle in as well. And they took it away on the car carrier when they delivered it. So there was this, 18-wheeler car carrier roaming around my neighborhood with 5 Rivians and a Toyota Sequoia on it. So kind of neat.
I remember that old Sequoia.
Yeah. But it was really cool because they have what the guide that comes to go over the vehicle with you when they deliver it. And so I felt like they took care of me. It was really nice. It was definitely higher end, concierge kind of feel, which I appreciate for sure. Being busy and having a family, I don't have time to run to Atlanta, figure it out, drive home, and then like, all right, what's going on here, and get on a internet or a chat board or somewhere and figure out, what does this mean and everything. So he spent, probably better part of 90 minutes going over the vehicle with me. I had a little bit of a head start because my brother started, showing me some of the things that are unique to it. But it was a really great experience. And then he took care of all the paperwork. Almost all of it was digital. We got the temporary tag. It was interesting. The temporary tag was issued out of Illinois, and I took delivery in December, and the tag expired, I think, at the end of March. So there was a lot of time built into that temporary tag, which was kind of cool.
That's impressive. Most temp tags are only about 30 days. So
yeah.
Well, I understand why you didn't want to not only waste your time driving all the way down to Atlanta and back, because, we know that drive down 85 is so much fun, but you don't want to have this first time driving a vehicle that's radically different from anything you've ever driven to be through Atlanta.
That's true. That is very true.
And it's nice that, there's often an option, and I do this a lot with my clients, of having a vehicle delivered to them, especially during the pandemic when we had to source cars from all over the country and we're shipping things everywhere. But normally when that happens, the person that delivers it has nothing to do with that car. It's a trucker or it's a retired person who drives it. They have no idea how the vehicle works. So you are left to read the manual, watch the YouTube videos. So the fact that you actually had the car delivered by someone who knew how the car worked, who could teach it to you and go over all of the crazy features that it has, that's just fantastic. And what I would expect from a company like Rivian and for the price tag of their cars.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, how long did you have it?
Let's see. Almost 9 months, 10 months, 9 or 10 months.
So not even a year.
Yep.
So let's start with, what did you like about it?
Well, 835 horsepower is pretty freaking cool.
I cannot argue with that. That's kind of ridiculous. And especially out of an electric motor, which also gives you this wonderfully flat torque curve. So you hit that pedal and woo, instant speeding ticket.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get any of those, fortunately, but instant power to get on when you're merging on the interstate, or if there's a truck you need to get past and that spot is closing, you can punch it and just kind of get out in front of it. So it was really nice to have that. It's also, the R1S that I had, it was 4 motors. So you could put it into a conserve mode and it would shut off 2 motors. And so you would lose, essentially half your horsepower, but it was still plenty of power.
Still had over 400.
yeah. It was, so that was probably one of the most fun things about driving it. And you put it in sport mode, drop it down all the way to the lowest height. And it was really cool. It would auto adjust the height of the vehicle depending upon your speed and conditions. But you drop it down, the suspension tightens up a little bit, the steering tightens up a little bit. And it handled better than some sports cars I've been in those big. I had 22-inch tires on it, so it gripped and it was great. I think there's McLaren DNA somewhere in the suspension of the R1s, and you could feel it. It was just really, really well built.
And they learned a lot from Porsche too.
Yeah.
So that German over engineering. They learned from the best.
Yeah. Actually, another thing that I really thought was really well designed and worked really well was the app, which sounds kind of silly, but I had it long enough. You don't need a key. You just use your phone. And so it had proximity sensor. You walk up close to it in the parking lot, the lights come on, the handles pop out, it unlocks. You walk away from it, like 10, 12 feet away from it, and it locks. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to put the phone in a special place in the vehicle. You just get in and it's ready to go.
Like it's just waiting for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Did it say, "Hello, Glenn, welcome back"?
No, not yet. But they probably came up with an update for that.
Reminds me of the old Knight Rider series.
Yeah, right.
Hello, Michael.
I think the other thing that I think was surprisingly interesting that I came to appreciate was the frunk. It was huge, and I remember the first time we took it to school to drop my kids off, and they put their backpacks in the frunk, and we get to school and you put it in park and you open up the hood and then they walk out to the front. And like everybody's looking at it, it's like, what's wrong with your car? And then they see the girls pulling their backpacks out of it. And they're like, oh, what is that? So that was kind of neat, being the first person one of the first people probably around here to have one. I mean, there's a couple running around, but.
For those of you who don't know what a frunk is, it is a front trunk because you didn't have a big motor up there under the hood. You open the hood and you have storage space. Now, I had that in my old Porsche Boxster because the engine was right behind my seat, being mid-engine. So I had storage space the size of a Coleman cooler in the front and then a small boot in the back. So I could store, 4 grocery bags. Yours, I imagine, was a little larger.
Yeah, no, this trunk, it was big enough. I remember my brother got it. And I was at his house that his 2 sons crawled in the front and were sitting in it, 7 and 4 at the time.
Don't recommend storing your children in the frunk, but
But they had fun getting in there and getting back out. And it's big. There's even a drain plug in it. So you can use it as a cooler. So I never did this, but you can put ice in there, put your tailgate supplies in there or your fish when you go fishing. I mean, it's a really, Rivian will tell you that they designed this thing for, the outdoors and, it's the national park crowd and everything else. And I'm like, that's great. But I think the reality of it is 90% of these Rivians are driving around the suburbs, toting kids, doing things that I did. It is what it is, right?
But they're great for tailgating.
They are great. See, good for
tailgating. And with that huge battery pack,
yes,
you can tailgate all day long.
You can. And you can also run refrigerators off of it when hurricanes come through and knock out the power.
I heard you had to do that.
Unfortunately, a few weeks ago, Helen came through here in North Carolina, and I'm sure everyone's aware of what it did out western North Carolina, but we didn't have power for almost a day and a half. And so I just ran an extension cord from the Rivian into the kitchen and plugged the fridge in, and fortunately, we didn't lose any of our food.
See, that's fantastic. And, the last episode, we talked about the impacts of Hurricanes Helene and Milton on the automotive industry and people specifically. And, my sister had to run that extension cord from her generator in her home in Hendersonville to her fridge and also to her neighbor's fridge. But you just had to run it from your car. You had a generator in your driveway.
Yeah, that was pretty neat.
That is cool. So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about what you didn't like about it and what ultimately led to your decision to selling this car when you didn't even own it a year. I mean, it sounds like it was awesome.
It was for the most part. And I'll tell you, one other thing we didn't talk about was it was really neat not having to go to the gas station.
Now, you recharged it at your house. Did you have a charging station at your home? Okay.
Yeah, we had the wall charger installed in the garage about a week after we took delivery of it, which was nice. So, the part about running around town, parking at your house every night and charging, plugging in every, 2 or 3 times a week just to keep it at 80% was fantastic. Very convenient, very cost effective. I did an analysis, on how many kilowatts we used over the course of the time that we had it compared to the year before.
Of course you did.
And
you're my people, Glenn.
Yeah,
you're my people.
I know. There was a spreadsheet involved. My wife has recovering accountant that she is, makes me do things on Excel spreadsheets now. But I looked at it and we spent about $160 a month. The electric bill jumped $160 a month. And so I know I was spending way more than $160 a month putting gas in the Sequoia. So, I can say confidently that if you just look at the fuel versus the electric expense, it definitely was a savings by using the electric vehicle. I didn't charge it a ton using a third party or even Rivian's Adventure Network. Every now and then I would if we were on a road trip or going somewhere and we just needed to make sure we got home. But so I can't really tell you the cost comparisons there. So that was nice. However, that comes with a price, if you will. And it was interesting because it was about a month after I got the Rivian. And here in North Carolina, we don't have terribly cold winters, but we have a week here and a week there where the temperature will drop and it gets nasty and you think you're in the Midwest again.
Wait a minute. I moved south for a reason. What happened?
Yeah, exactly. And so we were driving to Greensboro, which is about 90 miles or so from Charlotte. It's slightly uphill and it was the middle of January. And so we left in the morning. It was about 37 degrees. We had a little bit of a headwind and I charged it to 100% because I knew we were, I wanted to make sure that we had 320, 330 miles of range, just no problems.
Don't want that range anxiety to kick in.
Exactly. By the time we got to Greensboro, the range on the battery was about 170 miles. It went from 320 to 170 on 90 actual miles. And so the computer was telling me on the way home that we were going to have to stop and charge for 15 minutes to get home. So it was 180 mile round trip, maybe, with a couple stops in there. But I shouldn't have had to charge on the way home. But it was that much of a drain when it was that cold and that much of a headwind and going uphill a little bit. And I was really surprised at how much loss I got when it was cold. And as we came into the spring and we started to get above about 50 degrees, you could tell that it was almost a one-to-one. You weren't really losing that conversion with the cold. But that was really striking. I was really surprised of how much range you lose in the cold. And obviously I can imagine if you lived in Michigan or Chicago or Minnesota and you have one of the R1s, you're going to struggle with that in the wintertime for sure.
Yeah.
So that was probably the biggest
thing. And it takes so much longer to recharge it because the whole system, it literally is like molasses. It's great when that syrup is nice and hot and you pour it on the pancakes, but when it's been in the fridge, it's
So very, very thick. Yeah.
And battery range is not like your fuel tank range. Your fuel tank takes, say, 15 gallons, as long as your car is running well, approximately what your miles to the gallon are going to be. So, I know that I can make it to Winston-Salem and back, in one tank of gas in my car. But with the battery, that range that they tell you that it gets is like the ideal range. It's like, you can get up to this amount, but you might not, depending on all these factors. And cold is the single biggest one.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, there were four of us in the car. We had some stuff in there. So yeah, it all added to that drain on the range for sure.
Right. Because it's not just the motors that are draining the battery. It's everything else you're running. Are you listening to the radio? Heaven forbid, are you running the heater, the air conditioning?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things that require computer chips are sucking up those electrons.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, was that the main reason that you ditched it? Because granted, we only get cold weather, for 2 days every 3 years down here. And everybody shuts down and just doesn't go anywhere. So maybe that was your fault for not staying home, Glenn.
Maybe. Yeah. For sure. No, that wasn't really, I don't think that was the biggest reason. I don't know that, I think the biggest reason, Leanna, the more that I look at it, I think the combination of the fact that I just don't think we're quite ready for EVs yet in the United States. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you the example of another road trip we did. We drove to Wilmington, which is about 3.5 hours from Charlotte. And it was in April. And that drive is relatively flat. It's a little bit downhill. Obviously, we're heading toward the coast. And so it was warm. It was probably in the high 60s, low 70s. And we got down there, didn't have to charge the whole trip. I struggled to find a place to charge the Rivian in Wilmington because there just weren't a lot of level 3 chargers. There were several level 1 chargers, which if you're not familiar with a level 1, it's about 1 to 2 miles per hour. It's like plugging into a 20 in your house. And so that was the only thing that really was available. Now, Rivian has a relationship with Tesla and the fact that the Rivian vehicles are supposed to be able to use Tesla chargers, but the adapters that we were supposed to receive to get from the Rivian adapter to the NACS never arrived before I sold the Rivian, so I never did it. However, if I remember correctly, there were only 2 Tesla chargers, and neither of them in Wilmington area were anywhere close to be convenient to where we were staying at the hotel. So I parked the vehicle across the street in the municipal garage that had an EV charger. And I plugged in Thursday night when we got there. By the time we were ready to leave Sunday morning, it was only at like 80%.
Oh my goodness.
So,
and it wasn't even cold.
And it wasn't even cold. So it was, and we didn't drive anywhere. We couldn't I can't unplug the car for 3 hours because, I need to keep charging it. And so we had to stop on the way home. Fortunately, there was I think it was a Shell charger, which I had never used before. And so, you're sitting there, you got to download the new app, wait for that, put your information in, wait for that. And then fortunately, there were two chargers at this place. And it was at this little tiny town. Literally, the town is one stoplight. And we pull up and I get all this set up and I plug it in and it won't talk to it. Like the charger and the car wouldn't talk to each other. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to delete the app and start it again. I restarted the Rivian, like your computer. I did a reboot. And I'm like, all right, let's try the other charger. So I moved it over and I plugged it in. Unfortunately, this one would talk to the Rivian. So we were able to charge it. But I'm sitting there spending half an hour, 40 minutes doing all this stuff. And my kids are like, can we go home? Yeah, I'm hungry. Where's the bathroom? All that stuff. So that was kind of annoying. And I know that sounds like petty, but it was kind of an example of, the issue that I'm seeing with this is this vehicle is great if you're running around town. If you're not too far from home base and you go home and you charge on your own charger, which at home it was a level 2 charger, we're getting about 24 miles per hour charge. And so that works, that makes a lot of sense. But I think the fact that the infrastructure is still not there, it's not as efficient as it needs to be, especially in the cold weather. I wasn't comfortable with it. It didn't give me anxiety necessarily, but it was definitely gave me pause to make those kinds of trips. And then you factor in the cost, and they're not cheap.
No, you didn't buy a Nissan Leaf.
No, right. I put my deposit down on the Rivian. It was the summer of 21, and that locked in the price. And which was a good thing I did, because when I paid for it, when I got it delivered in December of 23, it was almost $20,000 less than what they were selling them. Ooh. If you went in and bought them. So I saved some money. If you're not looking at the video, I'm air quoting.
I know a lot of people that took delivery and immediately resold them and made a killing during the pandemic.
I thought about that too. And I should have done that, but so the car payment was a lot higher than I think I wanted to keep going with. And the car insurance is, everybody's car insurance has gone up, but I mean, it was almost $2,400 a year for car insurance for the Rivian.
Ouch. That's like teenage boy rates.
Yeah. And I think it's a combination. There's just not a ton of Rivians on the road yet. Right. So there's not a lot of parts. There's not a lot of understanding, but there's also so much technology in this car that that's the expensive stuff to fix. And so those were probably the biggest reasons why we decided to move on. And, again, financially, I was able to get out of it and not lose money. And, the value of them, unfortunately, is going to start to really kind of dive, because the next generation is starting to roll out. There's more EVs, more people are wanting EVs. So the used market is probably going to start to fluctuate like that. So
it will. And that's one thing that I talked about with the change in consumer behavior and just the more availability of EVs on the market. Those values are dropping. And that was why, I was trying to figure out, okay, we've got to get Glenn's Rivian sold before it drops. Because I did see a $2,000 drop in the values over the summer. I'm like, gosh, we're waiting for this. We want this other car that's hard to find, but I don't want to lose any more value on the Rivian. So it was kind of this juggling game of getting that timing right so it would work out financially. But I'm glad you had that toy to play with while you did. But I think the reasons that you decided to get rid of it are the same reasons that a lot of Americans are falling out of love. The glamour of owning one of these cool new cars isn't quite as cracked up as it's supposed to be, in reality, because you just, the charging situation. If I didn't, just have the ability to stop at a gas station and literally spend 4 minutes filling up my tank and boom, I'm back on the road, that alone would probably drive me crazy.
Yeah. What I knew going into this, Leanne, I thought about it. This is an electric vehicle. This is a new behavior for me. I'm going to have to adapt. I'm going to have to change the way we do things and understand that. And I was willing to do that going in. And I think a lot of people who complain about that, I don't think they thought about the fact that this was new. They just applied the same thought process of the gas station access and the gas tank. Oh, it's just charging. It's the same thing. Well, it's not. It requires a different sets, a kind of understandings and parameters and how your behavior has to change. And so I was aware of that going in.
And that's good. So, and what I tell people when I have clients that say, oh, I want an EV, if they live in California or the New York tri-state area, I kind of assume they're a little more education simply because they have so much more infrastructure than we do down here in the South. I mean, good grief. I mean, how long did it take us to get, a Trader Joe's and a Whole Foods,
Or to finish 485.
Or just to finish the freeway. Yeah, that's a never ending project. But in those other areas where you have so much more infrastructure, it's so much easier. But yeah, you get out, in Wilmington, you're lucky if you have cell phone signal, much less someplace to charge your electric car. So you have to be aware of where you live. And even, can you get your car to the nearest service center on one charge? Little things like that. So I understand why. I'm sure it was a difficult decision to get rid of the Rivian because it was really cool.
Yeah, it was. And, you brought up the service center thing and that was another thing. When you buy a brand new car, you're like, I'm not going to really have to take it in. It should be fine. Well, when you buy the first generation of a brand new car company, and it wasn't anything, there were things that needed to be addressed. None of them were, deal breakers or anything that made the car inoperable. But, over the course of the first 3-4 months, the list of little things here and there started to really kind of get long. And Rivian sent a mobile repair technician with a van out a couple times to address some of the things. But we ended up, the list was long and unfortunately distinguished where it had to get down to Atlanta. And so I drove it down to Atlanta, which we talked about was 4 hours. And I dropped it off at the service center down there, picked up the loaner, and I drove home in the same day.
Ooh, that is a long day.
So that was fun, and I did the whole trip in about 11 hours. So not much getting out of the car time. And then, so I had the rental car for almost 5 weeks because I wasn't able to get down there in time, when they finished. So it kind of sat there for about a week before I could get back down there.
At least they let you keep that loaner. That was nice.
And it was funny because the rental car that I had was a 2024 Chevy Tahoe, which was extremely comfortable and very thirsty compared to a Rivian. But how
many times did you have to refill just coming back from Atlanta?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was very thirsty. I was like, where's the external gas tank? I need to get home here. But it was strange going from an EV to a V8 in a big vehicle like that. But and then I had 4.5, 5 weeks later, I'd drive back down there and do it all again. And so I drove down there and turned around and drove home. So that in itself was probably a big thing too, that I wouldn't even realize if I hadn't had to take it down there. So
right, absolutely.
Yep.
So instead, you decided to get something that was a balance. Got you a hybrid. So
yes.
You have good fuel economy, but
yes.
you can still just pull up and take 4 minutes to fill up the tank and doesn't even give the kids too much time to complain. And then you're back on the road.
Yeah, they probably won't even notice they're busy looking at their phones.
Well, that and they're lounged back in those swanky, reclining seats. And it's like the second row captain's chairs are a lazy boy because we got the new Kia Carnival hybrid top of the line. And that's a pretty sweet ride too.
Yes. We put those seats to rest immediately after getting it. Had another road trip, which was fascinating because it was down to the coast as well. That was about a 3.5 hour drive, and got almost 35 miles to the gallon. And it was so weird to fill up when we left Charlotte and not have to. I didn't fill up until probably Tuesday after we got back.
That's amazing.
It was really kind of interesting to put that many miles on it without having to go to the gas station.
Right. I mean, I expect that in my mother's Corolla, but to do it in a family-sized vehicle is pretty amazing. And that's why I am a big fan of hybrids. And I think that that's a more practical solution, given where we are technology-wise today for the United States and just the size of our country and our propensity to love to jump on the road and actually go places and not having a cool train system like Europe does yet. So, I think you made an excellent choice. I'm sorry you don't have the Rivian anymore, but, I'm going to be interested in just continuing to watch the technology both in the vehicles and in the infrastructure. But I think, if any of the electric vehicle companies are really going to succeed and thrive and create very usable and excellent vehicles, I think Rivian's going to be one of the leaders for that. At least they're not filing bankruptcy like Fisker. So
yeah, that's for sure. And we put a deposit down on the R2, and that's still a couple of years away. So it gives us time to kind of study and see the trends and see how Rivian does with things. But I'm still very, intrigued by Rivian itself and the products and everything. So I haven't written it off for sure, but I think I'm just, the pause button being pushed, I think is the accurate description of where I am right now.
And I think a lot of people are in the same situation and making similar decisions, given the demand for hybrids in the US is the highest of anything. So, well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully other people who are considering electric vehicles this will give them some things that they might not have considered, and then they can take maybe that second thought before they take the plunge, and hopefully they won't make a decision that they end up regretting. So Glenn, especially for anybody who's in the Charlotte area who might be looking for an awesome chiropractor, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, it's really easy. If you go to jaffechiropractic.com, you can find us there on all your favorite social media channels. Just go search for Jaffe Chiro CLT. And even if you don't live in the Charlotte area, I can help you find a great doctor near you. So if you need some help, just let us know.
That's awesome. And Jaffe is spelled Jaffe for those of you that are just listening and not on the YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much, Glenn. I really appreciate it. And if you are one of those people who's considering, should I buy an electric vehicle? Should I not? My online car buying course goes over, we have a whole lesson on electric vehicles and the pros and cons and things you need to consider when you're selecting the vehicle for yourself. So check out my online course at carbuyingcourse.com, or you can get to it on my website, thecarchick.com. Until next week, folks, drive safely.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.